On the 14th of October, 1066, on a ridge of ground south of a Sussex town, an entire civilization ended, and another began. By nightfall, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England lay dead on the field, an arrow, the legend says, buried in his eye, and a duke from across the sea had won a kingdom in a single day. That duke was William, and if your surname is one of the 15 I'm about to show you, his conquerors are your ancestors. Because you are not simply English by heritage. You are tied to the men who crossed the Channel with William, who carved up this island at the point of a sword, whose castles still stand on English hills, and whose names, borrowed from the villages and strongholds of Normandy, are stamped on the map of England to this very day. 15 surnames, 15 bloodlines. And recent DNA breakthroughs have begun to do what no medieval scribe ever could, tracing the male lines of these Norman families back across the sea, back through the Dukes of Normandy, all the way to a Viking warlord named Rollo, who first seized that land from the King of France. Stay until the final surnames, because several of them carry the blood of William's own kin, and one of them is a name written in the very first line of English surnames ever recorded. Your name reached you across nearly 1,000 years. The question is, who first carried it up that bloody ridge? Let's begin with the name that raised the greatest of all the northern dynasties. We start in the north, with a name that became a byword for power, Percy. It looks English, and today it feels English to the bone, but it is not. It comes from Percy-en-Auge, a village in Normandy, and the family that bore it, the de Percys, crossed with the Conqueror's cause and were granted vast estates across Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, all of it set down in the Domesday Book, William's great survey of his conquered kingdom. From those northern lands, the Percys rose and rose until they were Earls of Northumberland, the mightiest family of the English North, so powerful they could raise armies against kings. One of them, Henry Percy, won a fame so bright he is remembered by his nickname alone, Hotspur, immortalized by Shakespeare, killed in rebellion against his own king. If your name is Percy, you carry the name of a Norman village and the blood of the lords who ruled the north, and the next name became the kingmakers of England. The second name is Neville. Again it wears an English coat, and again the truth lies across the water. It comes from one of the places in Normandy called Neuville, the new town, and the family that carried it into England became, in time, one of the most dangerous names a king could hear. The Nevilles rose in the north alongside the Percys, and by the 15th century, they stood at the very center of the Wars of the Roses, the long dynastic bloodletting between the houses of York and Lancaster. One Neville earned a title history has never forgotten. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, was called the Kingmaker, the man whose wealth and armies could make one king and unmake another, until he was finally killed on the field at Barnet. If your name is Neville, you carry the name of a Norman new town and the blood of the men who made and broke kings. And the third name belonged to one of William's greatest commanders. The third name is Montgomery. It comes from Saint Foy de Montgomery in Normandy, and behind it stands one of the towering figures of the conquest, Roger de Montgomery. He was so trusted by William that he was left behind to help govern Normandy itself while the Duke sailed to England, and for his loyalty, he was rewarded with enormous power in the conquered land, made Earl of Shrewsbury, set to guard the wild and dangerous Welsh frontier. He raised castles along the border, and one of them gave its name to an entire Welsh county, Montgomeryshire, a Norman lord's name printed permanently onto the map of Wales. Centuries later, the name would ring out again on the battlefields of the 20th century, carried by Field Marshal Montgomery, the victor of El Alamein. If your name is Montgomery, you carry the name of one of the Conqueror's chief captains. And the fourth name means, quite simply, the beautiful mountain. The fourth name is Beaumont, and here the meaning is written plainly on its face, from the Old French Beaumont, the beautiful hill, taken from places in Normandy such as Beaumont-le-Roger. But the man who carried it to England was anything but ornamental. Robert de Beaumont fought at Hastings itself, in the very front of the battle, and the chronicler records that though it was his first fight and he was still a young man, He performed feats of valor worthy of eternal remembrance. He was made Earl of Leicester, and his blood ran so deep into the English nobility that he is counted as an ancestor of no fewer than 6 of the barons who forced King John to seal the Magna Carta a century and a half later. If your name is Beaumont, you carry a Norman name from one of the proven companions who stood with William on the field at Hastings, and the 5th name became a whisper of danger on the Welsh border. Before I go on, here is something almost no one watching realizes about their own name. If you've ever looked at your surname and wondered whether the blood of the Norman conquerors runs somewhere in your line, I've put the whole story together in a guide called Where Do You Really Come From? The link is in the description below. But stay right here, because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. The names ahead include a family accused of murdering a king, a house whose men claim descent from the Dukes of Normandy themselves, and a single name that appears in the very first record of an inherited English surname. The 5th name is Mortimer. It comes from Mortimer in Normandy, and here even the place name carries a shadow, for it can be read as the Dead Sea, or the still, stagnant water. The Mortimers were granted lands on the Welsh marches, that lawless borderland where Norman lords ruled almost as kings, and there they grew into one of the most formidable and feared families in the realm. Their darkest hour came with Roger Mortimer, who rose in rebellion against King Edward II, escaped from the Tower of London, took the Queen herself as his lover, and is widely believed to have had the imprisoned king murdered so that he might rule England in all but name. His triumph did not last. The young Edward III seized power, and Mortimer was dragged to the gallows at Tyburn. If your name is Mortimer, you carry a Norman name steeped in ambition and the blood of kings, and the 6th name reaches back beyond Normandy, all the way to the Vikings. The 6th name is Sinclair, or in its older form, Saint Clair. It comes from a place in Normandy named for a saint, Saint Clair, and the family that bore it, the de Saint Clairs, followed the Norman cause and later carried the name north into Scotland, where it hardened into Sinclair. There they became earls and lords, and one of them raised a building that has drawn wonder and wild speculation for centuries, Rosslyn Chapel, its stone carvings so strange and intricate that legends of hidden treasure and secret orders cling to it still. And the deepest root of the name runs back further yet, for some traditions tie the St. Clairs by blood to the ducal house of Normandy itself, and through it to Rollo, the Viking who founded that dynasty. If your name is Sinclair, you may carry a name that reaches from a Norman village back to the Northmen themselves. And the 7th name was carried by a family of famous hounds and famous soldiers. The 7th name is Talbot. Its origin lies in an old Germanic personal name carried by the Normans, and possibly tied to a word meaning to destroy, a fitting root for a family that would become one of England's great military houses. The Talbots came with the conquest and rose to become Earls of Shrewsbury, and their greatest son was John Talbot, the terror of the French in the 100 Years' War, so relentless a commander that the French called him the English Achilles. He died at last on the field at Castillon, an old man still leading from the front. The family name even became attached to a breed of white hunting hound, the Talbot, long since vanished, but still standing on old English coats of arms and inn signs. If your name is Talbot, you carry a Norman name of soldiers and hunting hounds, and the 8th name comes from a rabbit warren and rose to an earldom. The 8th name is Warren. It comes from a place in Normandy, La Varenne, tied to the old French word for a game park or rabbit warren, an enclosed hunting ground. But there was nothing humble about the man who carried it. William de Warenne fought at Hastings, one of the proven companions of the Conqueror, and was rewarded with lands so vast they were scattered across more than a dozen English counties, making him one of the richest men in the new kingdom. He was created Earl of Surrey and married into the Conqueror's own extended family. If your name is Warren, you carry a Norman name from one of the 15 men who can be proven to have stood with William at Hastings, and the 9th name became a symbol of rebellion. The 9th name is Mowbray. It comes from a place in Normandy, Montbray, and the family that bore it became one of the great baronial houses of England, rising in time to become Dukes of Norfolk, among the highest ranks the English nobility could reach. A Mowbray stood among the barons who confronted King John, and centuries later, in Shakespeare's telling, it is Thomas Mowbray who faces Henry Bolingbroke in the famous aborted duel that opens the tragedy of Richard II, both men banished, the quarrel that lit the fuse of a dynasty's fall. If your name is Mowbray, you carry a Norman name that climbed to the very summit of the English nobility, and the 10th name would one day become the most famous haunted name in English fiction. The 10th name is Baskerville. It comes from a place in Normandy, likely Boscherville, the settlement by the wood, and the Baskervilles were among the Norman families set down in the Domesday Book, granted lands along the Welsh border in Herefordshire, where they held their seat for centuries. For most of its long history, it was simply the name of an old and respectable Marcher family. And then, in 1902, Arthur Conan Doyle borrowed it for a story of a spectral hound stalking a family across the moors, and the Hound of the Baskervilles fixed the name forever in the imagination of the world. If your name is Baskerville, you carry a genuine Norman name that fiction made immortal, and the 11th name announces its own descent in a single fierce word. The 11th name is Devereux. It comes from Evreux in Normandy, and the family carried the preposition of origin with them, Devereux, of Evreux, a mark of the aristocratic Norman house from which they sprang. The Devereux rose to become viscounts, and then earls of Essex, and one of them burned brightly and briefly at the court of Elizabeth I. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, was the Queen's dazzling favorite, until ambition and wounded pride drove him to a reckless rebellion against her, and the favorite who had once been closest to the throne was beheaded within the Tower. Their family motto itself proclaimed their conquering roots. If your name is Devereux, you carry the proud name of a Norman comital house. And the 12th name held the north for the conqueror in blood. The 12th name is Lacy, or Lacy. It comes from Lacy in Normandy, and the de Lacy family were among the conqueror's most important tenants, granted enormous power in the borderlands of Herefordshire, and later in the north of England and in Ireland. They were builders of great fortresses, and it was a de Lacy who raised much of the mighty Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire, one of the most formidable strongholds in all of England, a castle that would later become a place of royal imprisonment and death. If your name is Lacy, you carry the name of a Norman house that helped hold the conquered land by stone and sword, and the 13th name was carried on the map from a Norman hill. The 13th name is Vernon. It comes from Vernon in Normandy, a town on the River Seine, and the family that carried it into England, the de Vernons, settled and spread until they held lands in Cheshire and beyond. One branch holding their seat at Haddon Hall in Derbyshire, one of the best preserved medieval manor houses in all of England, still standing today. The name became so woven into the English gentry that it long ago ceased to feel foreign at all. If your name is Vernon, you carry the name of a Norman town, worn smooth by 9 centuries of English life. And the 14th name hides a saint inside a courtier. The 14th name is Seymour. Say it aloud and you would never guess its origin, for it comes from Saint Maur in Normandy, the name of the saint worn down over the centuries into the smooth English Seymour. And this Norman name rose to touch the crown itself. Jane Seymour became the 3rd wife of Henry VIII, and the mother of his only legitimate son, the boy who would become King Edward VI. For a moment, the blood of a Norman village sat upon the throne of England. The family became Dukes of Somerset, and one of them, Jane's brother, ruled England as Lord Protector during the young king's childhood, before he too fell to the executioner's axe. If your name is Seymour, you carry a Norman saint's name that married into the royal house of England, and now the 15th and final name, the one that names the revolution itself. The 15th name is Fitzgerald, and every name that begins with that strange syllable, Fitz. Fitzwilliam, Fitzroy, Fitzpatrick, Fitzhugh. Because Fitz is not English at all. It comes from the Norman French fils, from the Latin filius, meaning son, so that Fitzgerald means simply son of Gerald. And here is why it closes this list. Historians point to the sons of a Norman named Gerald, who took the name Fitzgerald in honor of their forebear, as standing at the very beginning of the modern English surname, one of the first inherited family names ever recorded, passed deliberately from one generation to the next around the middle of the 12th century. Before the Normans came, the English mostly bore single names that died with them. It was the conquerors who brought the very idea of the inherited surname, the notion that a name could be a bloodline carried forward through time. If your name begins with Fitz, you carry not just a Norman name, but a piece of the invention of the surname itself. And that is the thread that runs through every name on this list. 15 surnames, 15 bloodlines, 15 names that crossed a stormy channel in the autumn of 1066 and never went home, taken from the villages and castles and saints of Normandy, and pressed forever onto the hills and shires of England. And here is what the DNA breakthroughs really revealed. Your name was never just a label. It is a conquest. It is a village across the sea you have never seen. It is the memory of men who won a kingdom in a single day and held it with stone and steel, whose blood, some say, runs in as much as a quarter of England, carried down through 900 years by families who built the castles, wrote the laws, made and unmade kings, and gave England the very idea that a name could be inherited at all. Some of these names began on the field at Hastings. Some began with a beautiful hill, a rabbit warren, a saint, or a Viking warlord named Rollo. But every single one of them survived. So tell me, drop your surname in the comments, and tell me which Norman house you think your bloodline comes from. And if you know the story your family carried down through the centuries, say it, because those stories deserve to be heard. If you made it to the end, subscribe. Every week we go deeper into the names people carry, without ever knowing what they truly mean.